Thank you all for joining, and I will now introduce today's presenter. Sherri Wilke is the Quality and Compliance Program Director at the CU Cancer Center. She has been deeply rooted in regulatory affairs and compliance for over 20 years since joining the CU Cancer Center in 2004. Sherri has been involved in 8 FDA inspections and has learned something new from each one. She's excited to share her takeaways and tips with all of us today. Thank you, Sherri, for being here with us this afternoon. I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Victoria. Let me just get my screen up here. Righty. Thank you for the warm welcome. Like Victoria said, I'm Sherri Wilke, and I'm the Quality and Compliance Program Director. Fun fact about me, I love FDA inspections. So I have been through 8 FDA inspections. I've learned something new every single time I'm involved in one of them. And a lot of you will hear me say sometimes you just gotta hug the cactus, which in essence means if something's prickly, just lean into it and hug it and just try and learn something as you go along. So that's a little bit about me. Before we get started, before I dive into what I've learned, I thought it was important to know why the FDA performs what they call establishment inspections. So all the inspections that I've been involved with have been routine, and all of them have been for market approval of a drug. There are directed inspections. I've heard of a couple on our campus just through the grapevine. And those are usually, there's a tip that might happen. Something's not quite right with what the research team is doing. And the FDA comes in, usually unannounced, for a directed or a for-cause audit or inspection. The follow-up inspection would be done if the site had a 483 and the FDA wanted to come back and follow up on their CAPAs and make sure that what they wrote in their 483 response was actually being followed at their site and how that was looking. So today, what I hope you learn, what to do when the FDA calls, how to prepare for your inspection should you have one, tips and tricks on how to interact with the FDA, takeaways on conducting an FDA and what I've learned, things that are helpful, things that might not be as helpful, what to expect for the FDA exit meeting or the closeout meeting, and then what happens if you do get an FDA 483, which is not great. It happens, but it's a chance to learn, and it's usually when the FDA finds there's a trend or there's findings that they want to communicate to the site. Okay, so I think the first time the FDA called, right, the thing that came to mind was, oh my gosh, let's just get out of here and let somebody else deal with it. I'll stress, you just don't panic, remain calm. I think as I've seen it, the PI will usually get the phone call, or the FDA will leave a message on their clinic voicemail, and then they'll reach out to the study team right away. They're usually the ones that are very kind of panicked, you know, especially if they haven't been through an FDA inspection before. So it's really our job to calm them down and let them know that we've got this. So if you think about when the FDA calls, there's certain information that you want to get from them. Of course, you want to get their information. What's their contact number? How do they prefer? Can I email you back? What is the study that you're planning on inspecting? And then what has happened at our center, with the Cancer Center at least, is those calls will usually go to the clinical research manager or myself, and then I'll end up calling the FDA back and I'll get all of the details. That's, of course, if they're okay with that. Sometimes they just want to end their call very quickly, and then you just need to let them get as much information as you possibly can and just kind of go from there. So you would notify your leadership, of course, the PI if they don't already know. The study sponsor and the investigational pharmacy are within the first tier of notification. And then our facilitating FDA SOP, FDA inspections SOP, literally lists out, so you can make checklists, you can use that as a checklist, who to contact in the case of an FDA inspection. And the goal is really to contact everyone as soon as possible, probably no longer than 12 hours upon the first notification, because as you'll see, there's a lot of things to get set in motion in order to have a successful FDA inspection. So this over here on the left, let me back up. If you have an FDA regulated study or studies, it's important to know what to do and who to notify before the FDA calls. It'll just make you feel a lot more prepared to take that call. So the image on the left of this slide is a document that I prepared a long time ago that has been modified throughout the years. And I'm happy to share this document with you if you have FDA regulated studies. It really does just tell you what to do, who to call immediately versus who to call later. It gives you tips and tricks on, do you have your leadership cell phone numbers in case you would need to reach them right away? And then it also talks about a for-cause audit, right? So a for-cause audit or a directed audit would be typically the FDA showing up unannounced, and they won't have a Form 482. I'll go through that in a minute, but they would not have the Form 482. If that were to happen to your research team or to your PI, then that is an immediate phone call to Allison Lakin's office. She's our Vice Chancellor of Regulatory Compliance. She needs to be involved right away from the very get-go. And just so you know, if you're with the Cancer Center and you're on this Lunch and Learn today, then you have a lot of help. Our DSMC can help with an FDA audit prep, go through some things and help you pick out things that might be flags for the FDA. Many times for the FDA inspections I've been involved in, the pharmaceutical company will alert us, this study is going to go to market for drug approval. You had a lot of enrollments, or maybe we had a lot of enrollments and those ended up in screen failures. Those are some triggers for the FDA to audit our site. Of course, it could be that, the FDA Federal Center is on 6th and about Kipling, and there is bad weather, and our site is the closest for them to go and do one of their inspections in its time. So that can lead into it too. But there usually is, or there may be some inkling from the pharmaceutical or the sponsor, IND holder of an upcoming FDA inspection. And at that time, you can let me know about that, get familiar with our facilitating FDA inspections and our FDA 1572 SOPs on the research internet. You can certainly text or call me. And I'm happy to help you out with any of the preparation that you might need to have a successful FDA inspection. So as far as unannounced versus announced, we had one FDA inspection I was involved in, and they did show up somewhat unannounced. They were more interested in not necessarily letting the sponsor of the study know that they were coming to our site. And so we had an idea that they were coming, but the FDA literally walked into what used to be our clinical trailer, and he was just kind of standing there. So, people kind of knew what to do, but he definitely stood there for a while. And then it was a scramble, even though we were expecting him. Typically, I've been given about 3 days, sometimes 4, to get everything in order. So again, the main takeaway for this is you have help if you're in this situation. So let's go through preparation and helpful things to know. The thing again is that I usually get 3 days of notice. That may be notification on a Thursday, and things might have to go through the weekend to get them prepared, depending on how well the documents are flagged and whether the documents are on site versus archive. Something I want you to hear that I've learned is that the FDA gets their documents for their packet that they bring to our site for their inspection from the sponsor's TMF. So that means, you know, if you're notified of an FDA inspection, you don't want to delete or remove documents from your files. You don't want to significantly change anything. You want to leave it as is. Of course, if you have missing documents, especially that the monitor has mentioned in their monitor visits, then filing those documents is encouraged. But going and changing a bunch of things, or even can be entering data, it can definitely cause maybe pink flags within the FDA of a scramble that goes on after that they give their notification that they're coming. So just be aware of that. And then if there's time after you've done all of the participant charts, making sure you locate them. Sometimes the studies will be archived and things need to be pulled from archive. You can let Iron Mountain or whoever your document storage company is know that it's for an FDA inspection and they should be able to expedite that. Know that you may have to drive out to the storage facility and retrieve those boxes yourself in order to prepare and get everything put back into binders if it wasn't archived that way. And then for regulatory documents, you know, if they are in paper, just going through those, flagging the 1572s if they're not in their separate section, the financial disclosure forms and other important documents that I'll go through in just a minute. But the first thing, of course, you want to do is you want to assemble your FDA inspection team. So here's a picture of our FDA Fab 4. This was during the longest FDA inspection I've ever been involved in, which was 3 weeks long. We have Megan Brander, the clinical lead, who is taking the photo, and then myself, Kathy Hallwell, who's very well versed in CCTO regulatory, and then Victoria Nuanis, who was involved with the data on this specific study. We were really lucky to have those people that were involved with the study very closely to be able to go through the inspection. So that is something to think about when you're getting your team together, that the people that you want in front of the inspector are those that know the most about the study. What we usually do is we reserve 2 conference rooms so that our team can be in one and the FDA inspector can be in the other. This works really well to have close proximity as we assemble and get things back and forth to the inspector. I would recommend, if I had to, Academic Office 1 here on campus is a great place to settle in. And it's worked well for us to have the conference room either a floor above or below, or at least a couple of doors down, maybe not sharing a wall, so that conversations can take place and, you know, you can talk about different things without being overheard by the inspector. So that's something that's important too. Again, I'll refer to the FDA inspections, the Facilitating FDA Inspections SOP. It just is a great way, again, that outlines all of the steps, and if you follow that. Another thing that's bolded here is requesting EMR access as soon as possible. So UC Health is used to getting requests, and they can be expedited if the FDA is coming on site. So just make sure that you tell them that They are a part of our notification chain for the Cancer Center. So they might even reach out to one of you or to myself and ask, when do you need this by? But it's always a good idea to let them know that you need it right away. The team here around the table, we also had 1 or 2, sometimes 3 different document runners. So if a document was expected to be seen in the patient chart and maybe it wasn't, then we would have different document runners going back and searching other places for that document that was requested. So that's just something to think about too as you assemble your team. Another thing that you want to do is decide who will be your FDA lead or your most responsible individual. That person for all of the FDA inspections I've been involved with, the Cancer Clinical Trials Office has been myself, but it can certainly be someone else. It's just someone that can go in and greet the inspector upon their arrival and kind of be the point person for the FDA inspection. Talk with the FDA inspector, email them ahead of time, figure out what time they're planning to arrive, try and get out, how long they plan on being here, and then any other details that you might be able to eke out of them. True story, on my most recent FDA inspection, the FDA inspector called my cell phone number because she had worked with me in the past, and I think she left a message for the investigator at their clinic number, and she hadn't heard back in about 12 hours or something. And so she just called me, and I scooted it up the chain. So if that happens, just rest assured that I will get involved, and I will definitely let you all know. Trying to think of what else is important. Yeah. Those are the tips and tricks for that. So talking about organizing and flagging all of the binders, the patient charts for sure. The more organized you are, the happier your FDA inspector will be, and hopefully the smoother your inspection will go. So the picture here is our staging area, and then the cart here is our mobile office. With a printer that can connect to the laptop, and lots of paper for copies, as well as a stapler and hole punch and paper clips and other kind of administrative office supplies that you might need at any given time. So you want to flag all of your binders. You want to prioritize regulatory documents such as 1572, the financial disclosure forms, the delegation of authority log, the documentation of training. Definitely want to have all of that at the ready. The FDA inspections I've been involved with have been all electronic regulatory documents, but we've housed all of the original documents. And so it looked like a combination of documents, being paper for the 1572s and the financial disclosure forms, and then regulatory documents like IRB approvals and things like that. We could print out if the inspector wanted them printed, or we could give them to them in an electronic fashion. So it really is dependent upon the investigator that comes, the FDA inspector or investigator, they call themselves, that comes to the site. And they'll tell you how they want things or how they're allowed to get things. Oftentimes they're not allowed to plug anything into their laptops. So just keep that in mind. As I mentioned before, getting ready, you may have to take some time and get ready over the weekend, especially if you're notified on a Wednesday or a Thursday and they're arriving on a Monday or a Tuesday. So keep that in mind. Again, the documents that I've seen the FDA want the most are the ones that I listed, like the 1572, the financial disclosure form, definitely the initial IRB approval, sometimes the amendment approvals, and they may want to look at unanticipated problems or promptly reportables as well. Something I learned through one FDA inspection was double, maybe triple checking the financial disclosure form for an actual financial disclosure. So the forms are there for a reason. They want the PI and all of the sub-investigators involved in the study to disclose anything financially they might have. And we did have a PI who had a financial disclosure who marked yes on the box. However, the attachment that showed what that disclosure was missed. It was not in the files. And so that's a question that we got right off the bat. And we worked very quickly to get all of the documentation, and it turned out being fine. But in hindsight, if I had it to do over again, I would have triple checked that. And then of course, in subsequent FDA inspections, we always double and triple check that so that we have that prepared so the FDA doesn't have to ask us for it. And again, just as far as your planning, and if you're involved in the FDA inspection team, have your workload covered for at least 3 days. It might be longer than that. It isn't like you can't do any work, but it's really important to be able to prioritize the FDA inspection to get them in and out as quickly as we can. So what happens when they arrive on site? This is a picture of the badges just off the internet. What we usually see is they kind of have almost like a black wallet, and they just flash their credentials. So something to be left with here is you have to ask for the inspector's credentials or their badge when you greet them and before you escort them anywhere. I actually heard of a finding in an FDA inspection where the team didn't ask for the credentials and they cited them for that. So the FDA kind of has to prove that they are there, and we need to make sure that they are who they say they are, right? This is a picture of the form. It's called the Form FDA 482. It's a notice of inspection. So it isn't signed by the PI. It is a documentation that they are saying, we're here and we're going to inspect the site. And you can have them fill this out once you get up to your meeting room. Definitely after you review their credentials or have seen their badge. And they might want to complete it right then and there where you greet them, but it's been my experience that they usually they have kind of a pad of paper and they take that up to the meeting room. And then it's completed in the meeting room, and they give you a copy of that. They keep copies themselves. It's kind of this old school triplicate form that happens. The PI is encouraged to be there to greet the FDA when they arrive. It's not mandatory though. They can have a designee, also known as the most responsible individual, or the FDA lead, like we refer to that person as, and they can greet the FDA. All of this has been worked out beforehand via email or phone calls or something like that. What time will they arrive? Where will you meet them? You can give them a map of the campus. It's been my experience that most of them are quite familiar with our campus. And so it hasn't been that difficult to find where they are and be able to meet them. Just something to keep in mind. So the designee can receive that FDA 482, and then you keep that for your records, obviously. So after they've showed you the badge, after they've issued the 482 and you've received that, you can take them on a tour and show them where the restrooms are. You might ask them if they know where to go to eat on campus. You don't want to bring any snacks or water which sounds crazy, but it can sort of look like conversion or coercion, not conversion, coercion. And so you don't want to offer those things to them. In the 3-week-long inspection, I did end up bringing a case of bubbly. We did, have bubblies after a day, and I did give the inspector a can of bubbly, but that was on, I think, week 3, after we have really gotten to know her a little bit better and known how we interacted together. So that isn't necessarily discouraged, but it isn't encouraged either. Okay. Who should greet them upon their arrival on day 2, day 3, etc.? Probably best for the FDA lead to greet them. if the FDA lead can't for some reason, then it's completely okay for a member of that team to greet them and welcome them in and do those types of things. So with the FDA being here, this is just a brief outline of what to expect, and then I'll go into some things in detail in just a minute. What to expect. You can ask the investigator if they have a preference for the daily check-in. So there's always a daily greeting. Sometimes it's really brief. Just let them get back into the meeting room and do their work. They will tell you, check in on me at lunch or check in on me in a couple hours. You can ask, do you want me to check in with you in a couple of hours? And they'll usually tell you what they want you to do. Don't be afraid to ask them. And then on the whiteboards, we usually provide an email and a phone number. I've done my cell phone number before, or if there's a specific office number that you have on campus and you'll be right at the ready to take their call, then that would be a good phone number to put in there. We found that email works well, and then regular check-ins work really well too. So a good takeaway from this is just remember the FDA will tell you what they want to review. So don't say, are you here to review X, Y, and Z? They will tell you what they want to review. Don't put words in their mouths. And if you don't know the answer to a question, just say, I don't know, and I'll get the answer and get right back to you. You never want to make up an answer, or if you're unsure about something, answer it, because everything that we say in the FDA inspection can go into their report verbatim. They're taking copious amount of notes while we're interacting. And so you want to be really careful about that. The goal of the inspection is to get them in and out as quickly as possible. So 3 to 4 days has been my experience, maybe 5 days. It depends on how many we enrolled. And again, the 3-week long one was sort of the longest that I've ever been involved in. And there were lots of caveats. There were 21 participants enrolled in that study. It was the first inpatient study. That's a very complex TIL study that we did. And the FDA inspector was not as well versed with clinical research. They were more well versed with the preclinical research. And so it was a learning curve to help them understand that too. As far as the interviews with the PI and study team, common questions that they'll ask is, what is your role in this study? What are the tasks that you do for the study? How long have you been involved with this study? They'll ask the PI, how many patients did you enroll? How many screen failures were there? And so I do have coaching documents for FDA inspections, and I'm happy to share those with you too. They just go through some typical interview questions. They tend to ask the study team very similar questions, looking for similar answers. For study team, they might ask you, what's your consenting process? What is your process when you have a serious adverse event? Things of that nature. For data, I'm trying to think of a specific question they ask for data, but just be aware of what your role is and kind of what the tasks that you do are on a daily basis. And you don't have to go on and on about what you do, but just hit some main key points during your interview. And then, of course, try and stay calm when they're interviewing you. I know it can be kind of, it gets a little bit frazzling and everyone gets nervous, and that's normal, completely normal. The other takeaway when the FDA is here is you don't want to go into the room with them all by yourself. You want to bring a scribe with you, whether that scribe is a quick typer and they can type the notes into a OneNote or even a long running document, or they're better at writing on a paper notebook. Always bring 2 people in. And that's just so that if you're the one answering the question and interacting with the FDA, then they can be the ones that are taking the notes. You don't want to try and take the notes at the same time that you're interacting, if that makes sense. So think about having a backup at all times. especially during lunch hour and things when, you might need to go see a patient. So make sure that you have extra people. Make sure that 2 of you out of the 4 or 5 are there to interact with the FDA when needed. And like I said, get them in, get them out as quickly as possible. Try to answer their questions as fast as you can. Try and get them the documents that they request as quickly as possible. We sort of have a goal in mind, which is, it depends on the time of day, but within the day if it's earlier in the day, or by the next morning if it's later in the day. All right. So along with the interaction that will happen with the FDA, you'll have interaction letting your PI know, letting other members of your FDA team know what's happening. Of course, the sponsors want to know because this is their sort of their make it or break it moment, right? And so keeping in mind that the FDA and the presence of the FDA is the most important thing. The sponsor will ask for daily updates, and sometimes depending on what's happening, you can say no news is good news, or I'll email you later in the day. They want to know, and I understand that, but it's really important for the FDA's needs to be met and them to be prioritized over the sponsor, keeping in mind that the sponsor does need to know, but they may have a couple of days where they get very little information and then they get a better daily summary. Ways that we've communicated with each other is through MS Teams. So we'll start right when the FDA notification comes, we'll start a Teams site, and we will work through that with posts and documents, and we'll have files and all the things set up in that Teams site. Another way to do it is through a shared drive or OneDrive. It really is up to you, but as long as you can document and keep file, everything that you give to the FDA, either in paper or electronically, that's the goal here. And then we have found that it works well to sit nearby or with the FDA investigator. So be prepared if you have an EDC or an EMR. If for some reason they don't get access, they'll need over-the-shoulder access. They usually have a lot of questions about the EMR matching with the EDC and with the source documentation. So be prepared to find that information for them. Going back to the FDA comes with a packet that they've received from their center that's from the sponsor trial master file. They may expect to see documents in our records that might not be there. And so if they're asking for documents, it's typically because, and just to keep in mind, they've seen those in the trial master file. It's possible if you can't find that document in your site, that you may need to reach out to the sponsor, and then they can quickly get it back over to you. So just be aware of that. Typically what we've had at least one sponsor representative, if not 2, on the ready during any given time during an FDA inspection, and we're their first priority for them to help us answer questions or get documents. In your team, again, you just want to make sure, if you can, if they're still with the team and all of that, the people that will be the most successful are the ones that know the study the most. If they're not comfortable, or you don't think that they can speak to the FDA inspector, then it's completely okay to take them back for answering the questions and then go back to the FDA, kind of regroup and let the FDA know what the answer is. It worked really well that we happened to have on our 3-week long one, and actually all of the ones that I've been involved with, people that were very well versed with the study, and that works out really well. So again, during their review, a lot of times they'll mention, we'll start with regulatory on day 1 or 2. They're prioritizing looking at 1572s and financial disclosure forms. They're looking at the DOA log. they're kind of matching that to the 1572. And then of course they're looking for documentation of training. So the UAPs and PRIs can also be reviewed. Keep in mind that they have a lot of this information already in their packet. And again, just give them what they're asking for, either electronically or in paper. If they say they want all of it, I usually say, what does that mean? And it's completely okay to clarify with them exactly what they want. Keeping in mind that you need to get things to them quickly, and they might want the entire paper binder, or they might just want certain documents. Just make sure that you know what they want and that they are telling you what they want versus you just bringing them what you think they might want. So recently we have used Outlook Box is what one of our FDA inspectors had. The other one just wanted documents emailed to her. And so that worked out really well. You have to be flexible in how you're going to get the information to the inspector. So just keep that in mind. We just try and make it as easy as possible for them. Something to note about the DOA are the start and stop dates, and are those documented in the delegation of authority log? Is there documentation of protocol training either at the SIV or before that amendment or with that amendment before that person was added to the 1572? That may be some things that the FDA looks into during their inspection. So just keep that in mind as you're going through your regulatory documents. So the patient charts, it may be all or just certain ones. Screen failures might be reviewed as well. The more organized the patient charts, the happier the FDA investigator is. And we found it helpful to work through the patient chart with the FDA investigator from the get-go. So sort of navigating, you know, this flag is here, this is the information that is here for you. Or saying, what will you be looking for in this patient binder, and then just showing them where you might find that. That involves, you know, sitting with the FDA investigator. Some of them don't want any help at all. It just really is dependent upon who comes to the site. And then as far as the, you know, the typical findings that we see are where the data entered into the EDC doesn't match the EPIC record or the electronic medical record. And then that may or may not match the source. So keeping that in mind, the FDA they have just this long printout of the data. And they can see when the data was entered into the EDC, but sometimes their printout makes it hard for them to find a certain data point. And so if they're telling you they can't find something in the EDC, it's easiest if you have someone that's really familiar with the data or familiar with navigating that EDC to point out where those different data points are. And the less frustrated they can get about trying to find data and the more kind of collaborative you can be, the better. And then the days are spent really interacting with the FDA, lots of questions, or the FDA is very quiet. And then at the end of the day, they give you a whole bunch of things that you need to get to them by the next day. It can go either way. But what we remember is just get them the documents that they need or the answers that they need as quickly as possible. And then another reminder, if you don't know the answer, that's okay. You'll get the answer and you'll report back. Don't guess. They are, and I had this on one of my first slides, they're highly trained in body language. And so that's to their advantage. You just act as professional as you can, obviously. And they likely already know the answer when they're asking certain questions. So be aware of that, and your body language will show that. So open communication and paying attention to your body language. Coaching that I do sometimes is if you have your hands in your lap, that can be viewed as you're hiding something. So have your hands up on the desk when you're talking to them. And then just be real clear on what you're talking about. And if you don't understand their question, ask them to clarify. Can you ask that question a different way? Or what do you mean by that? Or just say, I don't know. It may be that you haven't been involved in the study and you're there in front of them and you need a minute or two to figure it out. And that's okay. So the exit meeting, I know that went really quickly. I'm at 12:42 and there's a reason. If we have some minutes left over, I'll go through some common findings that we've had. So I thought that you guys might like to see that as well. But I want to get through, what to do during the inspection first. So the FDA has finished their inspection. It's time for the closeout meeting. The PI must attend this. We have had, I think, one instance where the PI had to be on Zoom for some reason or the other. That isn't optimal. It's best for them to be in person. In fact, it's best for them to try and work, like I said in my slides, daily with the FDA, if not every other day, just meeting with them. That will show PI oversight and engagement, which I think is really important, right, in our FDA regulated studies. So you'll assemble people. For some, we've definitely had our FDA Fab 4 in there along with the PI. Allison Lakin might attend and she might not. I've invited her to a couple of them. And when we did get our 483, she was definitely there. In fact, we had kind of a large room full of people when we got our 483 because we had a feeling it was probably coming during, and it was really good learning experience. But typically it's the PI and the study team. You might ask an extra data person or two, but just be aware of where you have that conference room booked for the closeout meeting and who will fit comfortably in there. Certainly, right, you can always do a debrief with your team on what you learned from the FDA inspection. And so I know there can be a real interest in what's happening, but just keep in mind that everyone should be really comfortable during the closeout meeting. So if you have a large room, you can invite more people. If you have a smaller room, maybe better to keep it smaller. You always thank the FDA investigator for their review and their feedback. And then they'll go through their presentation. They might say they had, concerns, maybe SAE reporting was past the reportability to the sponsor, right? They found it was past 24 hours or it didn't match the protocol. They may say that, and they may say something like, I'm going to put this in your establishment inspection report. And that would clue in FDA inspectors down the line when they come to our site to look for different deficiencies that have been noted for our site. They wouldn't necessarily go into a form FDA 483, which is the form that you get where there are more or less formal observations and audit findings or inspection findings that happen. These are typically something like a trend of protocol deviations that would have affected the data or AEs that were missed. We had a recent FDA inspection where there were AEs that were in the EMR and they weren't recorded in the EDC or on the source, on the AE log. And we were able to talk through that with the FDA, but there was frustration there that there were a number of missed AEs. So something to keep in mind is just really paying attention to when you enter your data, how you enter your data. Does it match? Does everything go through and match? And I know we all get really busy and it's hard to do that quality check on your data and go back through it, but it's really important to prioritize that for the studies that are FDA regulated. It's important for all the studies, but especially the ones that are FDA regulated, because we are in a position where we are collaborating with the pharmaceutical company to get their drug to market, and dirty data will often derail that a bit, and then it can just be, we can look, our reputation gets a little bit bruised if we don't have clean data, or if it's not really the 483, but it's just if we don't quality check and do things so that they match as we're going through the study. So in the 483 closeout meeting, I'll just talk about that a little bit. What ended up happening is we had a few findings. And again, this was the 3-week-long one. This was the FDA investigator that was a little bit newer to our site, and admittedly more well-versed in the preclinical, more of the GLP or the GMP type of regs, not necessarily the GCP. And so during that time, there was a lot of education going on. Two things that I can recall are us needing to talk about the short form consenting process and the fact that the English informed consent is used as a summary. And so explaining things like that. Don't always assume that the FDA is correct, but definitely get clarification on what information they want. And then you can tell them, no, this is actually, this does go along with the regs. And, once the investigator checked back with kind of the central office, they knew that we were correct. But it is more of a collaboration approach. You want to listen actively during their closeout meeting. You can ask clarifying questions after they've presented whatever information they want to present. It may be that everything looks great. There were just a couple of things that I noticed, and then the inspection is complete. But you have to try really hard not to take anything personally, especially for the principal investigators. I think, right, they can get almost a defensive type of stature, and it isn't that they mean to do that. It's just it's something that they didn't want to have happen to get the 483. So just keeping in mind that you just listen, take it all in, ask clarifying questions if you need to, and then know if you do get a form FDA 483, and that, that's happened 1 out of the 8 inspections that I've been in. You check the facilitating FDA inspections SOP again, and it will tell you who to contact and when. I'm happy to help you on the responses. So the 483 that we received, it was our first inpatient study. The patients were enrolled, I think, from June of 2018 until 2020. So that involved enrollments during COVID. There were lots of different complexities to this TIL study. It was the tumor infiltrating lymphocytes type of study, which is more on the cell therapy piece of things. But we really had improved so many processes from the snippet of that time that the FDA inspection took place to when we could do the response. So the response did take, Megan and I worked on it. I think it was probably about 40, maybe 42 hours of touch time in getting that response just right, and double checking it and having Allison Lakin review it, which is required. But we really focused on process improvements that had already been done, or, recognizing, yes, we learned that the participant has to take a copy of the informed consent form. So that was kind of a one-off that we learned during our inspection was the participants, they may have a lot going on. They don't want that extra piece of paper, but the FDA regulations mandate that they have to have a copy of the informed consent. And so the patient said, I don't want a copy of that. And then it was documented by a very diligent CRC, just in case they came back and said, I didn't get a copy of the consent form. Well, yes, you did, but you denied a copy. But then, the FDA saw that on the checklist for the informed consent process, and then went back and cited that. I want to say, I think that was maybe a one-off, but it's something to keep in mind, right? You're being very diligent about documentation, but just knowing kind of what the regulations are, and really using our Cancer Center SOPs as your guiding light for doing, for going through different things. The participant has to receive a copy. So you can say something like, I have to give you a copy of this consent form. What you do with it after you leave this room is up to you. That's something that kind of happened during that inspection. Another one was the mismatches between the EDC and the EMR. A lot of like the data and things like that. Or there were scans that were, maybe labeled as progressive disease, or the patient couldn't continue on the study any longer, and therefore the PI took them off the study, and then it was thought that maybe the protocol wasn't followed. So those are common things. The number one, according to the research I did before this presentation, kind of the top 3 reasons, and this is what we see a lot in our DSMC audits as well, which the DSMC is here to audit and catch things before the FDA does, is documentation mismatches. So missed AEs, or maybe the informed consent form is dated signed today, but in the documentation, the document's showing today is the date, but then what's in the data for the study is that a date mismatch. It happened yesterday or today. So again, just really making sure that you're cross-checking your data to the Epic EMR and also to what the source has is really important when you're preparing for an FDA inspection. Another one is deviating from the protocol. And so if the sponsor has a protocol that is maybe really not following the clinic schedule, and there are common deviations that happen, or it's written in a way that can't be followed, it's really up to the site to say, the site PI to say, hey, is there a way to get this amended? Would you guys consider an amendment for this, because this is a common deviation. So they're looking for trends and deviations that would affect the integrity of the data or the safety of the participants. I am at time, and so I think we need to leave 5 minutes for questions. Those are some of the things that I've learned along the way during my FDA inspection journey. And again, I truly do love FDA inspections. So I look forward, if you are contacted by the FDA, that you reach out to me, and I'm happy to help you, especially if you're a Cancer Center member. That is one of the roles of my quality and compliance program director position that I have now with the Cancer Center. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Sherri. That was a great presentation and really great examples from your past experiences with FDA inspections. We had a few questions come through in the chat in regards to interviews with the FDA inspector. So the first one, let's say that you have a step-by-step work instruction process, and the FDA inspector asks about that process. Can you ask them, for example, or say to them, for example, that we pull up this working instruction document and follow the steps and provide that information to them? Or is it preferable to verbally recite the steps from memory?
So that can be tricky. If it's a guideline or a guidance document, technically those are not auditable documents. An SOP is definitely an auditable document, right? And if they ask for it and you're not following it, then that's where things get a little tricky. You can reference that you have a how-to document, and you follow that document and it looks like this. That would be my recommendation to do instead of pulling up the document. But Again, it really is sort of reading the room and knowing what they want. And if all of you are used to referencing that document, meaning pulling it up as you're going through your steps, and there's another coordinator within the FDA team that will be interviewed, having consistency within the study team is really important too. So that's, yeah, I think I'd recommend verbally, but if the document is used consistently, then there's no problem pulling up that document. That's a great question.
Great. Thank you, Sherri. Another question regarding interviews with the FDA inspector. Can you record those, or could that be perceived negatively or outright rejected?
We have never asked, and I would not ask to record those. I would instead take copious notes and document what questions were asked and how they were answered.
And then is it okay to provide unredacted source to the inspector through email?
I'm thinking about that. Technically, it is okay. They are a federal agency and they are covered under our HIPAA. If there is another way for them to know who that patient is, like a subject ID number, I would recommend that over PHI. And that just goes along with the HIPAA law of kind of the information that you need to do your job versus, accidentally giving them PHI of a person that they may know.
And this next question was sent privately, but do you still, do they still have you print a fair amount of documents during their visit? This person was a part of an FDA audit about 8 years ago, and they printed reams of paper during their visit.
Oh, wow. Recently, what I've seen is they're just looking for a few documents to take back in kind of their paper. I think they have to have a paper copy back at the headquarters. So that usually looks like the current consent form that's being signed by the subjects, the current 1572, or it could be all of the 1572s, the financial disclosure forms. There are, I would say, less documents now recently than there were, in 2006 when I had my first FDA inspection. That was a lot of paper, but there was a lot more paper going on. So a lot of the last 2 inspections were less paper, more electronic.